right? The pasuk says in Tehillim, Kapitel Kuf Daled, Yitamu Chatoim, that the sins should go away, but not the sinners. And so too he brings. The pasuk says in Tehillim, we say in Kapitel Derech Kapitel Aleph, Derech Rishon Toived. We don't say that the wicked should die, God forbid. Derech Rishon, the way of the sinner. So too, Yasun Valmana Yoided, right? We want to the Derech Rishon Yavis, right? It's the Derech of the Rasha, right? Also, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sameach B'Malton Shel Rishon, that Hashem is not happy when the wicked fall. So the look in Judaism in the Torah of the criminal is Chas V'Shalom. It's not him, but it's his way. We want him to stop this way. And anyone who did not see the Living Torah for this week, right, it's fascinating and it's highly recommended. Where it brings some sichas, but the Rebbe's shita on prison and that and reform. But anyway, so this is all about the relationship of the criminal to the officer. Now, another thing he brings is the police officer. Then at the end, he describes the police officer. His job is also, he has the shofet. So this is all about a shoter. So then you have a shofet. So shofet is a judge. And he says a lot of what the police officers do, they take the job of the judge because they do chakira drisha, right? They do investigations and they will taking evidence and things like this. So therefore, and this is actually fascinating, that, and we'll see this a lot now as we move to the second essay they have in the first Tchumen, is a lot of what they're going to compare and make a halachic comparison to a police officer to the shliach beistin, right? Now the shliach beistin, the Torah says you are not allowed to be mevaza a shliach beistin, to embarrass a shliach beistin and be rude to them, and they have to be respected and honored. And so he wants to draw a parallel between today, the police officer, at least he's describing the Jewish police officer, but there's a lot that we can learn from this. They're like the shliach beistin, and they have to be respected like a judge, like a dayan has to be respected. So the second article they have there is what they do is they go through a number of tshuvas. So this was more like an introduction. That's like, this is the Yiddish cook on a police officer, what he should be. And so what about, we're going to bring some practical cases, which are fascinating. So first off, he describes a police officer. We're describing all the respect he has to have, but the police officer, he says, so the Meshech Chachma says, who were the shoftim? The shotrim, the officers were from Shevet Levi, right? And the Meshech Chachma describes, why were they from Shevet Levi? Because we know Shevet Levi, the Gemara says, they did not have shibud, they were not doing the avdus, and maybe here's the magic. He says they were mezukache seichel. They were extremely intelligent. Dvukim b'muskalos. They were cleaving with muskalos, with Torah. They were not busy with the chomer and levanim and Mitzrayim, right? With the mortar and bricks. They didn't serve avodah zarah, and they were fitting to. This was an avodas Hashem. So, we described the respect that we're supposed to have for officers, but in Mitzrayim, the police officer was a very spiritual, quite a pure individual. So they should be mezukache seichel. So obviously, right, the officers which have, in this case, they were exactly the opposite of mezukache seichel. But so the first thing he brings is a fascinating tshuva from Zichron Yehuda. So Zichron Yehuda was the son of the Rosh, right? So we have the Rosh, he fled. The whole story about that with the Maisa with the Maram Rottenberg, which people may be familiar with. But anyway, the Rosh was the town of Maram Rottenberg. He fled from Germany to Spain. And after the Rosh passed away, right, the Rosh had many famous sons. The most famous were familiar with the Torah, the Balatorim, the Torah on which the Beis Yosef is written on. But he had another son named Yehuda. And Yehuda, when the Rosh passed away, so this, I guess, Rabbeinu Yehuda, he took over the rush as the head, I guess, based in Toledo. And so someone sent him, this is Zichron Yehuda Simonine Tess, the following question, that there was a dayan, and someone owed mas. So the job of, you read a lot in these tshuvas, and this is especially in places where the Jewish people had sovereignty to do dinei mamonos, right? The monetary, they had their own ability to adjudicate these cases. So they had to pay a mas, and the person had not paid the taxes. And this, I guess, the person, this dayan was commanded to go and catch him. And so at night, he's walking to shul to daven, and this person came, and they beat him. They hit him in his face. It says from between his eyes and his chin, and they hit him again, and they ripped his lips, and he describes the exact shaila, and they ripped at his beard, and the shaila was, okay. And so the shaila, which is community sent, the Rabbeinu Yehuda, the son of the Rosh, was, okay, like, what do we do? There was no edus, right? We don't have edus. They pretty much, they know who it was because they saw the guy right before. Afterwards, he ran away, and they summoned him, and he won't come. But there's no clear edus. What did they do to him, right? And so what the Rosh writes at the end, he describes that every, and in his introduction, before he says, sorry, Rabbeinu Yehuda, son of the Rosh, he says, every beis din, right? Every beis din Hagun, Roid Tzedek, has to make sure that the people keep all the takanas of Chazal, right? We have to add in all these derabbanans. He gives many examples, and the Torah says asu siyag l'Torah, and it's the beis din's job to make sure people keep these siyagim. And if people don't keep these fences, so then Chazal give them the discretion to take the law into their own hands. And he brings an example from the Gemara. It says that there was a time when during the Yevanim where someone was riding on a horse, which on Shabbos, and to ride on a horse on Shabbos is only a shvus, it's just the Rabbanan. And Beis Din brought him, and they gave him skila. They put him to death, right? Right, and even though the punishment for riding on a horse on Shabbos, the Rabbanan is not the death penalty, right? But it was a shas shmad, and the morale was down, and mitzvahs were coming kal, and therefore, in order kidei ligdor pirza, because there was a pirza, so they gave him skila, right? Even though it was over on a shvus, right? So this is, I guess I'm bringing this in connection where there's a lot of discussion, right? When these rioters are when things are getting out of hand, right? Well, all they're doing is this. Does it really demand, okay, and obviously I'm not saying anything, but you get an idea of what he's saying. When there is a pirza, when there is a bit of chaos, he says, well, they have the discretion to do what it needs. And if it means killing people, they have the right to do that as well. And anyway, he goes on to say that his final psak is that even though you don't have edus, but since it's very clear what this that it was this person, and he said now this would all be if they assaulted a regular person, right? And how much more so this was a shliach beis din. He said a shliach beis din. This person was a dayan, a shliach beis din, and he was going, and he was in the middle. And this would even be if it wasn't during his he wasn't carrying out his job, but here he was carrying out his job of bringing a person to justice, and he was, so therefore he paskins, chop off both his hands. He says we have to punish him very, very seriously. And so that's even though there was no testament. So people are familiar with the Sanhedrin and everything. You have to have usually you have to have proper edus. But he says this is a very severe thing that he insulted a shliach beis din or a dayan over here, and once again the author in Tchumen is making a parallel between a police officer and a shliach beis din. He says this is a very severe crime, and it calls for something drastic. And once again, this is a case where the shliach beis din, where the dayan was completely innocent and had not done anything wrong, right? Now, what happens? Now we're gonna have three cases here. So that's the case where if a police officer, the Zichron Yehuda, was totally innocent, then it calls for drastic punishment. Now we move on to what happens if a police officer is doing something with his own. What happens if he's using his own personal? Okay, if it's something personal. So we move to Reb Elio ibn Chaim, which Elio ibn Chaim was in the second half of the 16th century. He was a Rav in Kushta, and he wrote Shuvas Ranach, Reish Ayin Nun Ches. And this is Constantinople in Turkey, and he was the Chacham Bashi. So he was like the head of the Jewish community, or he was the head of the Rav of the whole, I guess, the Ottoman Empire then. And so the case he brings, Mordechai HaKohen, he was the Memuna HaKahol. So he's the officer, and he goes to Reb Shapsi, and Reb Shapsi's brother, they, once again, it was a case of missim, it was money. So he goes over to him, and he says, listen, you have to pay, you haven't been paying the taxes. Reb Shapsi, who was the one being summoned, humiliated. He was mevaze, the officer, representative of Beis Din, and he said, he says, you're pocketing the money for yourself, and he made fun of insulted his family. And it says, Reb Mordechai HaKohen, the one who's the officer, he insulted him really badly, and it was a Bifnei Kal Rav, there was a lot of people there, and the Ranach first off says L'choira, we should be patur. Seemingly, he should be exempt. Why? Because this was part of his tafkid. He's doing it as part of his job. And we have a din, and we're going to come back to this a couple times. So there is in Choshen Mishpat Siman, at the end of Siman Ches, which is speaking about speaks a lot about a shlich Beis Din. So the Ramah says that speaking about how you can't be noy kalas roish with a shlich Beis Din, one's not supposed to cause him tsar, and it says that if the shlich Beis Din, it says that the shliach Beis Din is allowed to do a din with the one who is not cooperating, lahakoisoi, to beat him, and imizikoi, and if the shliach Beis Din, which we're saying now is the police officer, if he causes pain to him, he says patur. So he's patur. So it seems to be from this the parallel that it seems as if he's doing, if he caused damage, he harmed the person he's trying to bring to justice, that he's patur because he was doing it as part of his job. So he says l'chora, he should be patur, even though he used excessive, he was mavayashim, embarrassed him publicly. However, the Ranach Eliyahu ibn Chaim, he says, however, when do we say that? He says that's only if it's part of his milui hatafkid, if in part of what he's doing, right? So he does something about excessive, he embarrasses him, humiliates him, right? Then fine, yes, he would be patur. He says, but in our case, in the Mikreh Hanidon, our case over here, he says it was kas, there was chema. He says there was a tina ishis, there was a personal vendetta against this Reb Shapsi, and therefore he's not patur. Right? He says to embarrass a shliach Beis Din. It says gadol avodim and soy. It's unbelievable sin. Right? When it says Elokim lo yistakalo, right? Chazal are learning Elokim lo yistakalo was going on. Chazal say a dayan, a shliach Beis Din even, right? Which here they want to learn. They want to extend this to a police officer, right? So it's a very severe thing. But when? Not when it's personal, right? And that's what they're saying, that there were some personal issues over here in the case, which happened in America, and so therefore he would not have a patur, right? So that's what it says. The halacha would not protect the officer if the officer was carrying out a personal agenda against the person, the criminal, whatever the case is. He would not be protected in that case. Finally, a third case, which this one is probably the most applicable, and this one is actually quoted in Siman Ches in Choshen Mishpat. It's quoted. The Piskei Teshuva himself quotes it. He quotes a Shvus Yaakov, the Shvus Yaakov Siman Kuf Pei. Anyway, speaks about a case where Reuven, this is Chelek Aleph Siman Kuf Pei, Reuven was called by the Shliach Beis Din came to Reuven, and what happens? The Shliach Beis Din, the police officer, comes to him, and he hit him, right? And he hit the Shliach Beis Din, and the Shliach Beis Din hit him back. But not only did he hit him back, it said he hit him back, makois achzarios, makois petza v'chabura makatria b'makloi, and he beat him so badly that the wound which he caused was way beyond what the regular makol, the regular stick can cause. And anyway, so there were 3 shilohs there. So anyway, it came to Beis Din, and the shiloh which was asked before the Shvus Yaakov Reicher, which was in he passed away 1733 in Metz in France, was do we now is he chayav, right? Is he chayav? Is he not chayav? And so he quotes, on one hand, he said it's a machlokes rishonim. In other words, the question is, if a police officer or shliach beis din uses excessive, he beat him excessively more than what was necessary to save himself in doing his job. So he says, according to the Ramah, right, he's putter. The Ramah seems to say, if the shliach beis din is doing now, and here he was doing his job, right, but he didn't have to beat him the way he beat him, so he's putter because he was doing his job, right? He shouldn't have done it, but he was doing his job. So it might be they could have shot him in the foot and they shot him somewhere, maybe in one of the vital organs or something, which apparently this happens. So according to the Ramah, he's putter, but he says, but according to the Ran, he's not putter, right? So machlokes rishonim. I don't know exactly what you say, Kimli, whatever the case is there, but he says that's a machlokes rishonim. The second question was, what about he beat him with a stick, and the makos which the person received were much far beyond what the stick could have given. So he says regarding that, so he's putter. Okay, anyway, there was a third question, it was not relevant. So anyway, so we see, according to Halacha, it seems when a person uses excessive, it's a machlokes rishonim if it was done, something was done excessively. Okay, so, but once again, but that's not when it's personal. When it's personal, so the Ranach said, then Eliyahu Ibn Chaim would say he would not have the patur of the Ramah. Okay, so we'll move on. So that is the case of, those are some of the cases in the first Tchumen about police officers. So, move on to, okay, there's so much to speak about here. Let's speak about now. Okay, so other cases with riots. So what about, so apparently, I don't know what is true, what is not true, but at least what people were saying is that it could be that some of the rioters, people were actually paid. Some of the looters were paid. There are a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon and have political interests, and some of the looters were paid to loot, right? That is what is the word on the street, apparently. But not, some people were paid to cause extra, have been paid to do this, right? So who's chayav? So theoretically, right, if someone was brought to Beis Din, what would be the halacha, right? The person who did the looting, or the person who paid a person to loot and paid a person to go destroy a police car, right? So this leads us to an Chosh Mishpat Sinin Shin Pei, right? So Sif base, it says, the Mechaber says, so if you tell someone, break someone's kli, and you'll be putter. Destroy someone's property, you'll be putter. So the Mechaber says he is chayav. The one that did it is chayav, and he has to pay, right? But in other words, so who is obligated for the damage? The one that did it, not the one that paid him to do it. But the one that paid him to do it, the ha'omer loy is shutafo. He's a shutaf, but avoin, he's a partner in the sin, and he's a rasha. Shari hichshil either v'chizik yidei oiver, because he was machshil, a blind person, and he's being mechazik oiver ver. So the sma, right? The sma, which is the Sefer Mir Sinai, which is a commentator in the Sadach Chosh Mishpat, says, well, why are you calling him an iver? That's lifnei iver. He says, what makes this guy an Iver? What makes him a blind? Well, he didn't know that blowing up a police car is not allowed, right? So he says, because, well, he's blind. Well, you told him that you'll take responsibility, and he didn't realize that he's going to be responsible. So he was an Iver on that. He was blind within that prat. But anyway, the point is, if anyone causes damage, so it's the one that did it, not the one that was starting them up, encouraging them. And the Beragoyla says the source for this is Ein Shliach L'Dvar Avera. In other words, according to the Torah, right, if a person causes damage, they can't blame, well, this person encouraged me to do that, right? Ein Shliach L'Dvar Avera. If the people who looted or they were causing damage, they are the ones who were responsible for this. So that's one halacha about this. Now, another thing, which is, what about stolen property, right? So apparently, if you go to LA, so there's going to be an influx of Gucci bags, Louis Vuitton, purses on the market, and you see them on eBay, and you're like, interesting, right? It's coming from this pickup in this inner city, from this inner city apartment, right? Which is a welfare apartment. Wow, they're selling Gucci bags. They've got 20 of them. So are you allowed to buy them? Right. So what would be the din of purchasing property theoretically that was stolen from the riots? So l'chora, so you might think. So we have in the Alter Rebbe. If anyone who's not learned this, it's fascinating. Chelik Vav. You have like a short synopsis of practical Choshen Mishpat. And so the Alter Rebbe in the laws of Mitzio Pikadon, he says in a Sif Yud Zion, if they have a place where you have Goyim living there, so you don't have to, usually if there's an Aveda, so you have to announce it. It's got to be announced. But what happens if they're Goyim living there, so you don't have to announce it, right? Because you don't have to say this, right? Because, and even if someone comes along and gives a simon, you don't have to give it back, because you can assume that the Goyim took it. But then he says, all that's Shur Sadin, but you should go Lifnim Shur Sadin, and if a person is giving a simon, so as long as there was a Yush before, then you should return it. The person gave up hope. Now, seemingly, these people who had these stalls, right, had these shops, right, when they knew that there were people who were, just going as a herd, right, as trampling the mob, they were miyayish from everything, right? They were miyayish from, they gave up hope, right? So what do we have? There's Yush, the Ganav gets it, and maybe, who knows, by the time you're getting it, maybe there's Yush, maybe there was already Shinui Rishus, maybe it transferred. So are you allowed to, and furthermore, now you say, well, maybe there's no Shinui Rishus, it hasn't transferred hands. So the Alter Rebbe says in Sif Yud Tes, there's a din called Shatfunar, that it says if someone saves something from a lion, a bear, a river, right? A river that was just a gush of water, and even if the person is coming along and he's saying, this is right, even the one who lost the object, if a person is coming along and he's saying, this is mine, right? A person comes along and says, right, hey, this is mine, please. So by case of Shatfunar, he's pater, Shatfunar, because it's automatic use. Even he says, now it's mine, right? It doesn't belong to him anymore, because we assume Bal Karchoy, against his will, he gives up hope. So you might think, so l'chora, anything that was taken in these cases, it's like this case in Mitzia, the laws of Mitzia, Pikadon Sif Yud Tes, like Shatfunar, and it's just like, Butla Daitoi, and he's saying he's not miyayish, it doesn't matter, right? However, l'chora, one could not take it, because in the laws of Gzela Ugneva, this is all within the Alter Rebbe Chelik Vav Sif Yud Tes. So the Alter Rebbe writes that it is Aser Liknois, one is not allowed to buy anything from a Ganav, a Chayfetz Shaganav, any object that they stole, Vavin Gadolhu, it's a tremendous Avera to buy something from a Ganav, because Shari Machzik Yidei Over Avera, because you're encouraging him. Namar Choylik in Ganav, Soina Nafshoy. On this it says, a person, Choylik in Ganav, Soina Nafshoy, he's encouraging himself, right? He's encouraging himself, and he's encouraging the Ganav, and he's causing him to do more gnevus, right? The goram lo lignev gnevus acheros, because if the ganav would not find anything to steal, then he wouldn't steal, right? So anyway, so l'chor, based on that, right? If one, the ultimate goes on, gives a lot of details, but if one thinks that something is stolen, has a bit of a schmecks like it was a gneva, then it would be usher for a person to purchase that item. Obviously, if something's up on eBay, one has to know what would be the rules of eBay, okay, about stolen property. Okay, another question, which was about a curfew. So something which, unfortunately, this has actually been halacha l'maisa about the curfew, because, so do you have to keep the curfew, right? There are curfews in many, many cities which have large populations, Jewish populations. There are curfews, right? So, right, the Alter Rebbe in the laws of Gneva Gzela Sifyutes, right, we have a halacha called Dinah de Malchus Dinah. We have a concept called Dinah de Malchus Dinah. And when does what happens if you have a woman and she needs to go to mikveh, right? So mikveh, leil tefillah, is after dark, right? So the Alter Rebbe says anything, so what, people think, oh, but if it's for Torah mitzvahs, doesn't apply. So the Alter Rebbe says anything, if there's Hanala Melech, it's for Tikkun HaMedina Kula, anything which is for the benefit of Tikkun HaMedina, then it applies. And so therefore, a lot of what's happened, a lot of Rabbanim in America paskin that the women should go the next day. Yom Shmini, they should go, whatever, all the halachas. Obviously, if it's relevant to anybody, they would have to ask a Rav. But there was paskin, instead of going the night after the 7th, right? So the 7th day, that they go the following day, because there are curfew in many cities. And according to halacha, that has to be kept. What else? Defending another question which was asked, or someone sent me an article that they interviewed a Jewish Iranian person, had a shop in the city in LA, right? And so the whole this was Shavuos, the second day of Shavuos, Shabbos. So his phone is ringing. It's Shabbos, so he's ignoring it. And this was the interview, and he describes how he finally he looked at the text, and it says the person who had the neighboring stall, like an Armenian guy, not Jewish, and he said, "Listen, right there, your whole thing is you have to come and board up your shop," and that's what he was calling him to do. Quickly board it up before they come. The looters are going to come, and as soon as he found out, so the article, he says he went and he drove over, and it was too late. So what would be theoretically halacha? Would a person be allowed to be Michoel Shabbos to save the shop? So you look in Shin, I was trying to think of a comparison, and in Shin Lamed Daled at the end, in the Alter B'Shulchan Aruch, Stiv Chav Ches, so it speaks about what happens if there's a fire, right? So if it's a fire, usually, you have the Mishnah speaks about you can save Muslim Shalosh Sudas, enough for 3 meals and 18 garments, but unless it says if you're living amongst Goyim, right, then you can save everything, because they might come to loot and kill. But the Alter Rebbe says clearly, if it's only for money, but let's say that it's only for money, then one is not allowed to be Michoel Shabbos just to save his money. So it could be if this person was living in Pico and they're going to destroy the shop, that l'chor he was not able to. Someone just asked me this and thought this was the l'chor he would not be allowed to drive there to save the shop himself. But hopefully he has insurance, and insurance will cover it. And finally, okay, the last couple minutes, we'll discuss what is the Jewish view on protesting itself, right? There is a lot on this. Out of all the subjects, right, there are many, many tshuvas on protesting, and I guess where a lot of this really began, there have been protests for years in Eretz Yisrael, but so in Petach Tikva in 1984, so there was the Kol, I forgot what it's called, the Kol Noah something, Heichal, anyway, they opened up, they had a cinema in Petach Tikva, and they started, although it was technically not allowed according to the government law, which had been made in like 1951. So the head of the city, forgot what his name was, Dov something, the head of the city, he said, no, they can start opening up Friday night. As soon as they did that, so the frum people, including the chief rabbis, they started protesting. They would protest, they would go out there Friday night after davening, and they would be there until 12 o'clock, until the end of the film. And they were there 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They were there for 33 weeks straight. They protested. And eventually it was getting bigger and bigger, and people were walking from Bnei Brak. And their protests were so not successful for Keret that the cinema, they were always sold out with tickets. And eventually there were so many people, they were so successful that they closed for renovations, and they were closed for 1.5 years of renovations. And so the Rav Malka, Rav Moshe Malka, which was originally from Morocco, and he was the chief rabbi based from Sfardim of Petach Tikva. He wrote a whole kuntrus about this, and he writes a whole halachic treatise about what are we accomplishing here? And he says, what have we accomplished over these 33 weeks? He says, I didn't go b'leiv shalom. I only went because everybody else was, all the different people were going. He says, but what the Gemara says, ad heichen, like until what extent do you have to rebuke? So the Gemara brings different opinions. He says, till they hit you, till they spit at you, ad kedei nazifa. He says, they've done it all. He says, they beat us, they spit at us. He said, they're just going and arresting from people right there. They arrested one of the rabbis was arrested, and then the Aguda was going to pull out of the coalition, right? It was getting crazy. He says, what have we accomplished? We have not accomplished anything. And he goes through great detail about the mitzvah of toichacha, boichiach, toichicha samisacha. And he says, they're not right. He said, what we have not accomplished. We've rebuked them. They haven't listened. And he goes in great detail. And the Bir Halacha and what's the tough Ches, I think the Bir Halacha about says if the person is not frum and they're in a bikuris, then they're going to laugh at you. There's no mitzvah techacha. He says they don't care, right? So what are we accomplishing? We just have to let's give up, right? He brings then Rav Zilberstein, Yitzchak Zilberstein, the son-in-law of Rabbi Yashiv. He writes back, no. He says, we're not doing it for them. We're doing it for us, right? It's not about toichacha. It's about, right? We're seeing Shabbos being trampling, right? They're destroying our Shabbos, right? We have to do it for us. And there's a Rav Simcha Cook, I think it was Rav Rechavat. He wrote a whole thing how no, we have to protest. And Rabbi Yashiv said we have to protest. So anyway, there was a huge machloek because there were a lot of contrasim, and it continued afterwards. But eventually, I think it went till 1987 or something. And eventually it died down. But as we see, there's still protests going on in Eretz Yisrael all the time. So another article I read, there's a Rav Arusi, I think Ratzon Arusi, Rabbi Dr. Arusi. I think he's like one of the head Yemenite rabbis in Eretz Yisrael. And he wrote an article about, according to Halacha, about protesting. So this was different. It was about, I think there were one of the groups of for handicapped rights, Nechim were protesting, and he wrote, it's all good, but because you have a personal cause, he says, what right do you have to stop traffic? You see, there have been recently in Eretz Yisrael, there were a lot of protests from the Ethiopians, and was watching one of the videos. He says they came in a certain, there was a certain minister in the government, and for like a year, they've been screaming and blowing these sirens, and the neighbors, it's agmas nefesh to the neighbors. He says, you have sick people, you have choilim, you have skenim, you have children. He says, what right, because you have a personal issue, what right do you have to affect the tzibur like this, right? So anyway, there's a little bit, so there's an article by a Rabbi Yehuda Zolden, and he is somewhere in I think the West Bank. And so after Gush Katif, so he wrote a fascinating article about what are the limits to protests. So his issue was, Gush Katif, they did a tremendous, right? The government did a tremendous avera of there's Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and they're taking away the land. So definitely there's a mitzvah, right? And it says, Chazal say, if you don't protest, you are nitfus on that sin, which is a lot of what's going on in America. They're saying if you're not protesting, so by being silent, you're an accomplice. So he says, if you don't protest, so it's like you're nitfus in that oven. And even here it's even worse because the majority of Israel voted to give back the land. So this is we have to protest. But he says, what are the limits? He says, can you damage property? So we have the famous Gemara about, it says in Brachas Tab Yotes on the base, if you see, it says a roy kilayim, the big day, you see a person who's wearing shatnez. It says poishtem afilo b'shuk, right? You can just take it off for the person. And they quote, there's another din which is brought up. A person has a star which is ribis, which is that a person is allowed to just tear it up. So l'chora, you see that a person could destroy property if they see a person doing an avera. But anyway, his conclusion is, even though the army and the police, they were shutfim, they were the ones who were carrying out the hitnat kut, right, taking away the gush katif. He says there's no, according to halacha, you cannot damage the property, or you can't damage the police cars, you cannot damage the property of the army. He said if police hit, he said if they hit us, and I myself, when I was in Eretz Yisrael, I remember going to some of the protests, and you see the police sometimes beating people, and he says try not to hit back. He said, run away, but it's, so he goes through, these are he calls the gvulos, where there are limits to protests. We can't use harm people and hit people and damage other people's property. But there are many sources, and there are whole contrasim written about this in Eretz Yisrael, about protesting when there's an injustice, that there is an inyan of oichiach to oichichas amisecha, but definitely not to harm anyone else. Okay, just we'll conclude with one of the things they showed on this on the Living Torah video this week. They quoted a sicha from Yud Shvat Tafshin Mem Gimel, and so the Rebbe writes there that the whole shorsh of things in the United States is, they're taking they're fighting for the Constitution, that separation of church and state. The Rebbe said you have to have in America, there's got to be this moment of silence, that if people would realize, if they would be from very young, when people are very young, they would be educated, that there's an ayin roya oizen shemas, right? There is a creator, there's a Shem which is creating the world, and then he says, then there would be, people would think twice, because if you just say, the Rebbe gives an example, well, you just punish it. Well, if you do this, we're going to put you in jail. You're going to be punished. Well, many times the person will either say, you know what, I can do it without getting caught, or they'll say maybe the punishment, the hana, overrides the punishment. Right? A lot of people say, fine, I'll be put in jail for the chance might get caught. I might be in jail for a little bit. I'll get out. Right? But if there would be chinuch from a very young age, right, of all of society, that is ayin ro oizen shamas, then this would save the day, and so we should be zoichet to Mashiach immediately, and Shiva Shiftach for Rishona will have the shoftim that Mashiach will appoint. Everyone enjoy the rest of your public holiday. Okay.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Stern. Excellent shir. I'm sure that it was enjoyed by everyone on a very topical and current issue. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure Rabbi Stern would be happy to answer them if you reach out to him. He's always looking for more people to learn with. For the second presentation of today, we're honored to have with us on the line live from California, Rabbi Moshe Brisky, who is a veteran shliach, a head shliach of the Kenneya Valley in California, and a veteran shliach of the Rebbe there, inspiring many Chabad houses in his area, and specifically with his Chabad house in Agora Hills. Rabbi Brisky, I've been honored to spend some time with him personally as well when I was a bachar and younger, as well as many of his children, and he's been kind enough to join us here today to discuss with us the legacy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as we prepare, as we come up towards Gimel Tammuz. It's a very timely issue as well. So, Rabbi Brisky, I know that we're maybe a minute or two early, but perhaps we can get